Hi, everybody. Welcome to this week's Scoop. What a time to work in news. As we start off this Monday, we're getting a flurry of headlines about the news industry itself. And we're going to talk a little bit about that here because we can't ignore it. I actually think the story is big, and the big headline being this morning that Tucker Carlson, one of the most popular and watched hosts in America and by proxy the entire world, is out at Fox News. And there's all sorts of questions swirling around this. We don't have a lot of answers, by the way. So we can't dive too deep into it, but I think there's something to pull apart. There's always a few threads to pull on. The one thing I don't love about news on news personalities is it just feels strange, right? Like, let's start a show only talking about the news, when there's actual news out there that affects so many more people in so many more powerful ways than what's actually happening on television or on social media. But in this case, I do think it's important. So we're going to tackle it. As I was getting ready for today, I was thinking about a familiar saying. You probably have heard me talk about this before related to the stock market. And that is, it's not how the stock market opens, it's how it ends. And I had that lesson. I had to learn that lesson very early on as a business journalist because there was so much anticipation. Of course, I was going into work at 2:00 in the morning. So you were really waiting for the market to open. You were hoping you had to get there. You had to get to the market open. There was a lot of excitement around that. But you sort of had to step back throughout the rest of the day because stocks could go up and down. A lot of things could happen. A lot of volatility could happen. And then it could all sort of go away by the end of the day when the market's closed. And so despite all the rockiness in between, the picture at the beginning and the end weren't that different. And I always think about that as such an interesting metaphor for how we start our week or how we start our day or how we start a show. It's not always how you start, it's also how you end. And I was thinking a lot about this because we're going to get a lot of news when it comes to the economy. And that's actually where I'm going to start today, because that is where we're all connected. It is important to remind ourselves, if we're living in America, we're part of the most powerful economy in the entire world. Our decisions on a regular basis really matter to companies and by proxy, our economy overall. Midweek, we're going to get a reading. GDP, it's our economic reading. It talks to us about economic growth. So we want to see a positive number there. In general, you'd like to see a high, strong number. About 2% is the barometer that people use. Anything 2% or higher usually is like, okay, that sounds pretty good. Anything lower than that, or certainly not a negative number, that is going to raise some antennas about what's going on with the economy. There's no traditional definition of a recession. There's not like, this is a recession, and once this happens, that's it, we're in a recession. But typically, if you have 2 quarters, so 2-3-month periods of negative economic growth, that is one of the variables that economists use to say, hey, we're in a recession. So this is one of the other reasons why this number matters. So about midweek, we're going to get that report card on the American economy, and that's something we're going to be looking forward to. In the meantime, though, this week is really important for several different reasons. And you may see a lot of headlines regarding the stock market or the banking industry. And the reason why is that this is a big week for earnings reports. So this is when companies submit their report cards, if they're publicly traded companies, and they say, here's what the last 90 days look like. This is how healthy we are or how unhealthy we are. And this will also give us some insight into what's happening in different parts of the economy. The tech sector, for example, you have a couple big names reporting. We're also going to be watching banks. So about 40% of publicly traded companies are going to be reporting this week. So it's a big bunch of them. So we're going to get a lot of information from a lot of different companies. One of the things I'm going to be paying close attention to is, it was just a few weeks ago. It feels like a million years ago, by the way, but it was only a few weeks ago that we were taking in the news of the big Silicon Valley bank collapse, and really with questions about financial stability, not only here at home, but around the world and the banking industry overall. Now, it seems to have settled since then somewhat, but we're going to be hearing from some of these smaller banks. First Republic is a bank. If you're out in California, you'll know that name. If you live anywhere, Texas, I'm not necessarily driving by First Republic banks. Growing up in California, we did. It was a well-known bank. That's a bank that a lot of folks have been watching to see, is it healthy? Is it going to stand? What's next for the banks that are very similar in stature, which is kind of like a medium-sized bank that serves a lot of people, has quite a bit of money. It's not a big, JP Morgan Chase, but it still is a bank that people are watching to see if it's an indicator of anything else that's going on in the banking system. And that's what you're really watching for these banks is whether or not the news about the bank is specific for their company themselves, or if it tells us something broader about the banking industry overall that we should pay attention to no matter where we bank. So there's a couple reasons that we're going to be paying close attention to any sort of business or economic news this week. And so we'll just be aware of that. Just know that if you see alerts on your phone, you get different, you see different headlines cross. This is a week that you could see a flurry of activity regarding that, not just what's going on in the media industry. We always, no matter what, no matter any topic that we cover, when we're looking at politics in America and we're getting closer and closer to a key cycle, which is the presidential cycle, the election of 2024. And in fact, closer than we may think because some events that we expect this week. When voters are really asked about what really matters most to them consistently, it's about the economy. Do I have a job? Am I economically secure? Do I have the security in my own home? Am I safe in the place that I live? A lot of our concerns as voters are really basic, and very similar to past generations. And so we want to watch what's going on with economic data. We want to watch what's happening with companies reporting. We also want to just pay attention to how everyone's feeling about the economy as well, because that can affect the way that Americans vote and the leadership that our country has and the direction we go from here on out. Speaking of that, there are reports that President Biden will announce on Tuesday, April 25th, that he is indeed entering the presidential race. That's been rumored, that's been reported. He said that more or less he said yes, but we haven't seen it officially announced. And so April 25th, 2019 was when he announced for president, just during the last cycle before he won the election. And so April 25th, we're going to have to ask him specifically if there's anything special about that date. But it looks like this is the date that he would release, according to these reports, a video announcing that he's entering the race. He did it in the past with a video, by the way. So this seems to be following a familiar pattern. There's been a few little murmurs in these reports that, if news allows, because you always have to leave room for that. Something happens that demands the president's attention. Releasing a video about his, reelection campaign may not happen on the day that you expect, but this may be a nod that it's coming soon, if not tomorrow. So that would be big news. Last week, we had the first well-known name enter the Democrat race for the presidency, and that was Robert F. Kennedy Jr. announcing in Boston. So it doesn't look like that pushed the president, if this indeed is his lucky date that he likes to announce that he is running. But one of the reasons why you want to announce, or why candidates decide when to announce, is that they want to throw their elbows up and kind of keep people out of the race. If you keep people out of the race, then you also keep the funding coming fewer directions. And funding is really key to being able to run a successful presidential campaign. Now, when you do announce and you do register with the Federal Election Commission, that also kicks into a series of different things. So you're under a certain standard or obligation to report how you're running your campaign. And if you don't do that quite so soon, you have a little bit more flexibility. So there's a couple of different reasons or strategies to wait or go, depending on what you feel you need in order to be successful. Now, the governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis, is a name that a lot of people are talking about related to the Republicans and who's running for president for the Republican Party. We already have a couple of names. We know that former President Trump is already in the race. But Governor DeSantis is doing something very interesting this week. He's out of the state of Florida. He's actually taking a trip overseas. A couple of the places that he's visiting include Japan and Israel. These are, big allies of the United States. And this is something we tend to see from candidates. They may not have a lot of foreign policy or overseas exposure or experience. This is kind of, I don't want to say a typical playbook, but something that kind of, again, raises an antenna to say, hey, maybe he's thinking about getting closer to this announcement or putting some things in place. When you are photographed with a world leader, as Governor DeSantis was just photographed with the leader of Japan over the last 24 hours, again, it's sort of showing to the world, this is how things could look if I'm president. And by the way, I can square up with world leaders and have conversations. And I actually have the background running the state of Florida to talk about things like the economy. And by the way, I'm also former military, so we can talk about foreign policy as well. So this is part potentially a preparation for him to enter the race. It's a a little bit of a choreographed event for anyone in the state of Florida, though he can't just suddenly just walk outside and say, I'm running for president. According to current law in Florida, you would have to resign your position in order to jump into another race. And you would need to give a little time. So you would have to basically signal to the world, I'm going to resign because I'm going to be running for president in this case. So there is a possibility, and it's happened in the past in Florida, where the legislature has decided to do away with that law, even temporarily, to allow for more flexibility for those in power to run for different positions. But even that would be a signal that maybe he's getting ready to jump into the race. And so all the more reason to keep an eye on what he's doing and where he's heading. If he wasn't, if he was just he's traveled to a couple different states that are also important. He's been all over the United States, Governor DeSantis. But this particular trip overseas definitely is one to watch, and we'll watch that for news as well. I want to talk to you about a big story that has been happening overseas on the continent of Africa. And we've been watching this for about a week because there's been a lot of turmoil in the country of Sudan. And I'm going to pull up a map here so that you can see it a little bit more closely. Sudan is a really big country, one of the biggest countries in Africa, in fact, on the East Coast. And you can see its geographical location is strategic for a few different reasons. It's just to the south of Egypt, just across the Red Sea from Saudi Arabia. And for the most part, it is a large Islamic country. And that matters for this particular reason. When we're talking about Sudan and its recent history, obviously its history goes back hundreds of thousands of years. But in recent history, there was a military dictatorship in Sudan, and Islamists were in power until a couple years ago. And this is the reason why this story matters. So, what's happening right now is you have two military rivals that both have a armed forces. One has the government military, one has this paramilitary force, and they're fighting each other for power. Caught in the crosshair are a lot of innocent people, including diplomats working for the United States that were just evacuated. An evacuation of a U.S. embassy anywhere in the world is huge, huge news. In this case, this just speaks to how dangerous it is in the country right now for the United States to go in, pull out all these people and fly them out of the country. Because where the capital is of Khartoum, it's actually, and we can see it here on this map, it's not close to the Red Sea. Air flights are not going in and out of the city right now. And that's why the people essentially don't have anywhere to go. If they go out into the street, they can be caught in this fighting. They're running out of food and resources. This is a terrible situation. The country has no solid leadership right now. So let's go back a couple of years. Why does Sudan actually matter to you? Why should we be paying close attention to what's happening in this particular African nation? It was just a few years ago that Sudan was designated a U.S. state sponsor of terrorism. There's only a handful of countries with this designation in the entire world. Let's see if we can name them all right now. Iran, North Korea, Cuba, and Syria. Just a few years ago, Sudan was also on that list. One of the reasons it was on that list is during the time of this military dictatorship where the Islamists were in power, it became a safe haven for terrorist groups, including a very well-known terrorist that Osama bin Laden. There was a time period in the 1990s where if you were Muslim, you could come into Sudan without a visa. And so this invited those that wanted to be in a safe place to come and work. And I'm using broad strokes there. Osama bin Laden apparently set up some legitimate businesses in Sudan, but I just found a Washington Post article from 1998, so before September 11th, where there was an interview with a local Sudanese person who was saying, "Oh yeah, Osama bin Laden, he lived down the road, never came out. None of the people around his house were local. They were Saudi or Yemeni or Pakistani. Remember, Osama bin Laden was Saudi." And he was heavily guarded anywhere that he went. He had tinted windows to his cars. He owned a ranch that he went to that no one could go to. So he was hiding in plain sight and developing his terrorist organization while in Sudan. And so when we see instability in this part of the world again, we should also pay attention to say, hey, wait a minute. Remember when this was a very unstable nation? And remember who moved in there and how they were able to gain strength and run businesses and earn money and have meetings. without without a lot of people watching. And look at what happened just a few years later, the worst terrorist attack in American history. So we want to watch Sudan. It seems very far away. It's not something that we talk about very often, but we have to tie these together because it matters. And it was during the Trump administration when that designation was removed. It was removed because the man that was in power, that was this strong man in power, was forced out. And Sudan was trying to create a new government. And as part of this new government, there was different military leadership. That military leadership has now clashed. And although the United States tried to do a couple things like remove this designation so Sudanese businesses could do business internationally, this designation limited Sudan from doing certain things. So uh, trying to open the marketplace, try to bring in investment. There's been hundreds of millions of dollars coming in from the United States, also aid organizations into Sudan for a variety of different reasons, trying to support a new government that's going to have different relationships with the countries around it and also with the Western world. And now it's fallen back into chaos. So we're going to be watching to see what happens from here. We do know, according to the latest reports, that there's thousands of American citizens still in Sudan trying to make their way out because it's not easy to do so. You saw that on the map. You're not really close to the Red Sea. You're not really close to places where you can get easily to another country. So we'll watch Sudan and see what comes next there. But I just wanted you to know there's a bigger picture here. It's not really being highlighted in the news. And I think it's really important. So let's talk a little bit about, as we move to, those are the big stories. We got the economy, we got politics, we got foreign policy. These are all stories that could really impact your life. Let's talk a little bit about something that probably won't impact your life as directly, but is causing a lot of news. And I don't want to miss it because one of the things I do like talking about is what's going on in the world of journalism. What does a free press look like? What does a healthy press look like in America? What does a good media landscape look like? And so this morning, on Monday morning, we get a very direct press release coming from Fox News that was very unexpected. This press release is extremely simple. It just says Fox News Media and Tucker Carlson have agreed to part ways. We thank him for his service to the network as a host and prior to that as a contributor. And basically that's it. So just a little insight to press releases in general. The more simple a press release, likely the more complicated the backstory. We don't know that for sure. We actually have no idea at this point why Tucker Carlson is no longer working at Fox News. There was no reason given. We haven't heard from Tucker Carlson. We don't know when we will hear from him. His social media in general is really focused on his show. He's not showing a lot of personal pictures or doing his own broadcast. So it'll be, we'll see. Maybe by the time you watch this, we get more information. But right now we don't have a lot. When I see this statement, I think, what's going on there? We have no idea. That's a high profile departure that matters because as one of the number one show on Fox News and one of the biggest shows with the biggest audience in American broadcasting right now, Tucker Carlson meant a lot to Fox News as a moneymaker, but also with the identity of the network. So seeing someone leave like this is important to ask the question of, well, what else could be coming from Fox News? Fox News has been in the news recently because of a major lawsuit that was settled with a high-profile defamation case related to the 2020 elections and the Dominion voting machines. And so that lawsuit was actually settled just last week for a lot of money, just under $800 million. There's more lawsuits coming against Fox News. And Tucker Carlson's emails and notes and text messages, along with a lot of other hosts, were actually exposed to the public as part of the preparation for this case. We don't know if that has anything to do with this, but it's just the timing of it is notable because that lawsuit was just settled last week and now we get this news. Again, it could be something completely different. We have no idea. It could be something completely random we don't know about that it led to his firing or the termination or them parting ways, however we want to put it. He's no longer working at the network. But this is a really big conservative voice that's removed off of a powerful media channel ahead of the 2024 elections. I think that's important no matter what. We got news from CNN, by the way, that Don Lemon, one of their top hosts that was moved to the morning broadcast, also is no longer working as part of the network. So you're getting some big names in media away from their traditional networks with the question about kind of where they're going to end up and how they're going to drive public conversation. So in the meantime, this is sort of separate, but I'm always looking for themes in the news and I listen to a lot of interviews. And so when I hear certain themes come up, I just want to flag them for you. I don't always know what they mean, but especially when it comes to media and journalism, I take a little liberty to kind of show this with you because I want to explain why I'm kind of curious about this. So we have two separate interviews where the themes are very much the same. Both of them aired yesterday. They are both on very different topics. One is an interview 60 Minutes did with Ray Epps. Ray Epps was present on January 6th at the riot in Capitol Hill. There have been a lot of theories about his involvement in the riots. Was he, people have asked the question, was he an informant for the FBI? Was he a leader in this? Like, who is this guy? He's a big, tall guy. So he's in a lot of videos. He was very recognizable in these videos. And because of his presence on social media, there's been all these questions about him, especially because the FBI didn't end up charging him for anything, even though he was so visible. So 60 Minutes actually tracks down Ray Epps and has a conversation with him. And I want you to listen to how he talks about Fox News and Tucker Carlson.
Who is Ray Epps?
That question has animated Fox News host Tucker Carlson for nearly 2 years.
Ray Epps? He's on video several times encouraging crimes, riots, breaches of the Capitol.
Carlson has focused on Epps more than 20 times on his top-rated show, a half dozen times so far this year.
He's obsessed with me. He's going to any means possible to destroy my life and our lives.
Why?
To shift blame on somebody else. If you look at it, Fox News, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Ted Cruz, Gates, they're all telling us before this thing that it was stolen. So you tell me, who has more impact on people, them or me?
An interesting question, a question that was similarly raised in a different way. In an interview with Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez, often referred to as AOC, she sat down, she's a Democrat from New York, sat down with the former press secretary for President Biden, Jen Psaki. And I want you to listen to their conversation about the role of the media and violence.
Do you think media organizations or social media platforms should be accountable for the role for being platforms for incitement?
I believe that when it comes to broadcast television, like Fox News, these are subject to federal law, federal regulation in terms of what's allowed on air and what isn't. And when you look at what Tucker Carlson and some of these other folks on Fox do, it is very, very clearly incitement of violence, very clearly incitement of violence. And that is the line that I think we have to be willing to contend with.
Interesting. Fox News, Tucker Carlson being mentioned in both interviews very directly and putting one of America's top broadcasting networks squarely in the center of some of our biggest stories and asking the question, both are asking the question, are these forces in American media accountable, responsible for actions that have happened by American citizens, by the hands of American citizens? And that's an interesting question. I'm curious what you think about that. As we're moving into this very heightened period where there's going to be a lot of media coverage, especially the words from AOC there, from the Congresswoman. Actually, I prefer saying Congresswoman. AOC sounds too casual. From the Congresswoman saying that they should be held accountable. I mean, that instantly says to me, well, accountability would look like prosecution. That's what I would take away from it. Is there the possibility, as we're seeing more cases brought against a major broadcasting network for creative litigation, saying that these broadcasting networks are responsible, accountable for crimes or actions by American citizens? And is that fair? Is that actually fair that these media organizations are so big, so powerful? A voice like Tucker Carlson is so big and so powerful that they are seducing people into acting a certain way. That's the question. And I'm curious what you think about that. Is the media that big? We used to talk about that with banks. They're too big to fail. Are the media organizations too big? Are they too powerful? Is that what we're really saying now? And what does that say about what's the line for freedom of the press and free speech and our ability to share our opinions and speak freely and report the news fairly? So there's a lot to unpack here. Again, not necessarily all related to Tucker Carlson leaving the network, but definitely that highlights it because he's such a controversial voice. As many of you know, I worked for Fox News for many years, and I think about my time there. One thing that sort of relates to this conversation, when I started on the news, this is really taking us back to prehistoric times, it feels like. It was a big deal that people would start their Twitter accounts. I remember when everyone was starting their Instagram accounts. Social media really wasn't a part my very first year, which was in 2007. It was just starting to be real big. Facebook, all of this started to be really big. Now, so many of us are not even watching television at all. Here, I worked on television. I barely watch television on TV at all. It's all on my phone. It's all clips without context. It's all right here in front of my face. It's not looking at a screen. It's not being able to walk away. I had a conversation with my in-laws the other day, and I was saying, when you used to get delivered the paper, you would get the newspaper, you could read the news. Some of it would be bad, some of it would be good, and then you would toss it out. And there'd be something about taking the news and then letting it go until the next day, which ironically is sort of what I'm trying to do with Scoop. I want to give you kind of like a big serving of news so you could take it in and then let it go. And that I think actually is a healthier way to consume news and to deliver it, because it makes us very intentional with what we're doing. And so I wonder, is it the media? Is it also just the way that we're consuming it? And are we giving the media too much credit? Are we giving someone like Tucker Carlson, just to play the flip side, too much credit to influence what people have the free will to do, which is they're accountable for their own actions on January 6th or any other day? So this is a much bigger conversation. And I feel like with these comments and these interviews, we're sort of on the verge of it. And I'm wondering where it's going to go from here. Again, when you start hearing these very familiar drum beats, I want to sit up and pay attention. Well, who else is going to say that next? And what's coming next? Remember, the 60 Minutes interview was likely scheduled on purpose because the belief was that the Fox News Dominion case was going to be taking place that week. So it would make good synergy for 60 Minutes to run that interview as this case was ongoing. Of course, the case was settled, but the interview still was relevant. So a lot to watch here, and we'll see where we started the week will not be where we end up. In fact, where we started today will not be where we end up this evening. So let's stay close. Questions and comments. Let me know if you have any thoughts on any of this. Let's talk about it. And maybe we can get together later on this week, dig a little deeper as we get more information. I have a feeling there's going to be more to unpack, and we'll be right here with you. We like the intentional scoop on Monday, but if we got to give you a little extra scoop later this week, we'll do it. Okay. Have a great week, and we'll see you with more on smarternews.com. Bye, guys.